Hey, assholes. This is what happens when you can't think of like a witty thing to say to open the show. You end up just demeaning and insulting your entire audience. I'm kidding. You're not. You're not assholes. You're my very good friends and my loyal and treasured viewers and supporters. Thank you for watching. And allowing me to insult you. Very first thing on the show. I appreciate it. And thank you all for joining me in the live chat. As always, I will be turning to the live chat and answering questions from there in a little while. But first, as always, I'm going to turn to pre-submitted questions from my wonderful Patreon patrons. And David Colby says, "Yay, I'm an asshole." Yes, you are, but in a good way. In a good way. So I'm going to turn now to my patron questions, and the first one of those is from Benjamin Fife, who says, "If you could elect any fictional character to be the next president of the United States, who would it be and why?" Which I think Benjamin snuck that question in the post show of Facepalm 5 this week. So I will answer it again. I fear as though my answer will be much the same as it was before, though. I said I would love to choose either Captain Picard or Captain Sisko from Star Trek, and Picard would probably be the better choice. If I think, in my heart of hearts, I would love to see. I think Jean-Luc Picard, it would be the perfect statesman, the perfect leader. But there is a part of me that's like, yeah, but boy, if you want to, if you want to make your enemies pay, then you put Ben Sisko in that office, but probably Captain Picard. And after I said that on Facepalm 5 on Monday, I noticed, I think someone in the live chat or someone in the comments posted afterwards said, "Oh, but it couldn't be Captain Picard because he's not a native-born citizen. He's born in France, and he couldn't be president of the United States." Okay, but just go with it. Like, if I have the power to get a fictional character elected to the presidency, let's just assume I also have the power to figure out some kind of a workaround as far as the native-born qualification. I can change the Constitution too. I can get a fictional character elected president, and I can change the Constitution so in case that fictional character was born outside the United States, they can still get to be president. Okay, let's just go with that. So, Captain Picard. Next question is from Andrew Michael. "Though it's more grounded than most sci-fi, Star Trek is still pretty fantastical. If it completely embraced the silliness, balls to the walls, batshit, cuckoo pants side of things, what fictional, supernatural, mythological being would you love to see? A vampire running the Tal Shiar? A dragon in a Starfleet uniform? A giant demon blasted to bits with holy photon torpedoes of Antioch?" Since this is my first question, I wanted to make it a stupid one. No, I think that's a great question. Boy, as you know, when you say dragon in a Starfleet uniform, I picture the size, like how a dragon who was serving in Starfleet that couldn't possibly serve on a starship. The size would be just too immense. Even the largest starship couldn't accommodate a dragon, you wouldn't think. But it made me think of like I feel like I'm failing as a nerd here. The Green Lantern that is an entire planet, and I can't think of their name. But there's a Green Lantern that is actually, and that's like an entire sentient planet, and it made me think of like, a dragon in a Starfleet uniform, the Green Lantern who was the size of a planet. I'm sure people in the chat will know, and we'll throw it up there. But vampire running the Tal Shiar, I'll go with that because all it would take for that to actually happen within Star Trek, it's not even that much of a stretch because you just need to put a Reman in charge, right? Because the Remans are basically vampires, at least aesthetically. They're like Buffy the Vampire Slayer vamped out monster vampires. They look like the Master, only a little with some differences in skin tone, maybe a little bit more monsterized, but they're basically the Master from Buffy. So yeah, have one of them run the Tal Shiar, and then you'll have a vampire running the Tal Shiar. We can make this happen, is what I'm saying. Let's get behind the idea of the vampire running the Tal Shiar, and we can actually make that happen and accomplish something. And that's what I think we should all focus on in our lives: is how can we accomplish the most good So let's get a vampire running the Tao Shiar, shall we? Next question is from Francois Lacombe. Have you ever visited a place or met people in a dream that you genuinely miss and wish you could visit or meet again? Yeah, but they're all real people. I mean, I've had dreams about people, either people who have died or people who aren't dead, but who I haven't seen for a very long time, who I would really love to see again. That I have dreams about and that I miss, like, and feel a deep longing to be with. But as far as people that I've only dreamt about, I can't really think of any. I can't think of like exclusively just imaginary dream people that I feel that way about, but real people that I'm separated from for whatever reason. That I've dreamed about. Yeah, sure. And there are places, there are a couple of places that I've dreamed about repeatedly over the years that are like made up dream places. And there are a couple of those that like I really wish I could actually go to. There was a place, I used to have dreams about it relatively frequently. It was a place in the woods, but it was like an intersection in the woods. It was like a perfectly square, like 90-degree intersection between two roads or two paths covered with leaves, with trees, on all sides, except for these two paths crossing at a perfect intersection in the middle of the woods. And I would have dreams that were set there sometimes. And it was such a warm and welcoming and wonderful place, and I haven't had a dream about that place for a long time, but it resembles no actual place that I've ever been. I mean, there's lots of, there's places in the woods and stuff that I've gone to, but there's no place that looks or feels quite like that. And that's a place that is like just a dream place that I miss feeling like I can go to. So yeah, I would throw that one up there too. Next question is from General Contact Unit Problem Child. Suppose you're a rich person and you live in a mansion in the countryside. You own a pizza restaurant chain. That's where your capital came from. In my ideal socialist revolution, all your pizza restaurants would be turned into worker cooperatives. After that, you'd have no way to sustain your life in the mansion. In order to survive, you'd have to go to a population center and join a commune. After that, formerly your mansion would either be demolished or, preferable, converted into apartments. Do you think treating the rich that way would be unethical? I thought that was an ethical alternative to something like sending the rich to prison camps or whatever, but the other day I tried to describe that scenario in the chat section of one of Objectively Subjective's premiering vids, and they and their friends took it as me saying, join our revolution or fuck off and starve. I feel that's probably a little harsh. I mean, assuming that life in the communes and that life under the socialist government or the socialist system, whatever is implemented, affords everyone a good quality of life, and people, and it's not join our revolution or fuck off and starve, then I don't see how that's that. I mean, if it raises quality of life for everybody, and quality of life is good for people in the communes, I mean, like, I don't see how it's that bad. If it results in the elimination of poverty for everybody, and yeah, if it means that some people with mansions don't get to live in their mansions anymore, I mean, like, that wouldn't really break my heart. Now, that does seem a little, from my perspective as someone who is not quite there in terms of, like, let's confiscate, let's tear down the mansion or turn it into apartments, or, let's implement a system where people have to join communes. Like, I don't feel it's necessary to go that far. I would much rather, like, maybe I'm naive, maybe I'm too optimistic, but I feel like we could accomplish a lot more if we just, let the rich guy with the pizza chain keep his mansion, but just legally mandated that he had to pay a shitload of taxes, and he had to pay his employees a living wage, and implement a system where there's universal health care for everybody, so his employees don't have to worry about that. And, like, I feel like we can accomplish a lot if we just implement those measures, and we won't have to get to the point where it's, no more rich people and everybody has to live in a commune. But the commune scenario that you described to me doesn't it does not strike me as much of a nightmare as maybe some other people think it is, and I don't interpret it as join our revolution or go starve. But personally, I do feel like it's a little far to go myself, but I don't think it would be like, some, like, if it works the way you say it works, and if it results in a good quality of life for people, I don't see why it would be like the most awful thing in the world. Next question is from Tom McDonald. Do you have an in real life group of like-minded folks with whom you talk politics and plan political activities, at least like getting out the vote or canvassing for a particular candidate or party? I know a lot of your online community are folks you at least generally agree with politically, but I'm curious how you live in a right-wing wasteland and yet stay sane and politically progressive. I know exactly one person in my village who is something like as far left as I am, but even she would probably blanch at my actual political positions, so I can't be entirely open with her either. So how do you stay sane? Sane-ish, anyway. Well, I don't really, with the exception of a handful of people, I don't really socialize all that much. In real life. I mean, I hang out with my wife a lot, and I hang out with certain people in my family every once in a great while. And other than that, it's, a lot of just spending time with online friends or working, just not really socializing at all. So no, I don't really have a lot. I mean, the IRL friends that I do have or have spent time with, generally speaking, in the past from this area, none of them have like political beliefs that are so opposed to mine that we couldn't get along. But a lot of the time we don't even talk about politics. Like the last time I was in a phase in my life where I was spending like a lot of time with in real life friends was when I was working with the independent film company Neon Reel that's based in Hagerstown, and we didn't really talk politics. Like we talked, movies and writing and things like that. We some of it was shop talk about stuff that we were actually working on, and some of it was movies that we had seen or books that people had read or things like that. And there wasn't a lot of political talk. I think generally speaking, we were all on more or less the same page politically in a broad sense, but we didn't really talk about politics. We talked about other stuff. And as for like, do I have people that I go that I go, canvassing with or to get out the vote? That's given me way too much credit. That's given me way too much credit. I was messaging with a really dear friend of mine last night, and she was saying how she's going to an event for Elizabeth Warren this weekend, and she might be making calls for her, and she made calls in the last presidential cycle as well for a candidate and was involved in get out the vote efforts, and I admire that so much. Like I have nothing but admiration for that because I have never done that. I've donated before, like I donated to Warren's campaign this time, but in terms of actually getting out and volunteering and doing canvassing or making phone calls or whatever, I've never done that. I've never seriously considered doing that. I don't know if I would be good at that or if I would enjoy doing that. But I have great admiration for people that do. But no, I've never done that. I've never done that. Next question is from Shirley Singleton. What provided you the most inspiration for the Whirlpool? Did you or your parents listen to a lot of televangelists growing up? Well, the biggest single inspiration for Michael Worley is Michael Voris, the guy who he started out as a straight satire of the Whirlpool. When I did the first couple of Whirlpool videos years and years ago, it was a direct spoof of Michael Voris. Now I think it's a lot more than that. It's not just it's not that narrow. Now I think it is a satire of religious fundamentalism and right-wing politics and conspiracy theories and religious broadcasting and all kinds of other stuff, and like YouTube grifters, and there's a lot thrown into Michael Worley and to the Whirlpool that where I can say things about all kinds of stuff that I think is harmful and awful. And so there isn't one single big inspiration, but yes, I did watch a lot of religious broadcasting when I was younger. I used to describe it as eavesdropping because I never really, even back when I was a Christian or trying to be a Christian, before I just threw up my hands and said, to hell with it, I'm an atheist. I don't think any of this stuff is true. Even before that, I never was really one of them. Like when I used to watch TBN a lot, and I never felt like my views or what I thought God was like or how I thought the universe worked was remotely represented by the theology that was being described by these people. But I used to watch John Hagee, I used to watch Kenneth Copeland and the 700 Club and Praise the Lord with Paul and Jan Crouch and Benny Hinn. I used to watch all of these just goofball, grifter con artists who made a living by charming retirees out of their pension checks and social security checks, and just these absolutely egregious, awful frauds who would sell people religion and empty promises to get money out of them, and it's contemptible. Like the whole thing is absolutely contemptible, and I used to watch that all the time. I was weirdly fascinated, voyeuristically fascinated by it. So there is some of that in Michael Worley and in the Whirlpool, sure, because I used to watch it a lot. So yeah, that definitely is an element of where that comes from. Next question from Dr. Babylon. Steve, in the past, I've talked about my criticisms of conservatives, libertarians, and centrists, neoliberals, but now I think it's finally time I shared some of my criticisms of the left. My first gripe is with the tendency of communists to dismiss the failure of every attempt to implement communism, usually by saying those societies weren't really communist. Right-wing libertarians have a similar tendency to argue that all historical examples of deregulated capitalism in action, including libertarian paradises like Galt's Gulch in Chile, weren't truly laissez-faire. Communism isn't some new idea that's never been attempted. It's been tried, and it almost always either gets taken over by authoritarian elements from within, like the Soviets, or gets brutally crushed from without, like the Paris Commune. Just like communism, there's a big difference between the way capitalism is supposed to work in theory and how it actually works in practice. Thoughts, Steve? Yeah, I think a lot of that is fair. I do think you do have to reckon with the fact that even if you could create a society built on communist principles that would work, that would function in theory and would solve a lot of the most egregious problems and eliminate the abuses of capitalism, how do you also protect that system from being co-opted and abused in ways analogous to the ways capitalism is abused, leading to a lot of similar problems or different problems, but problems that still lead to inequalities and human suffering, as has happened in other nominally communist states. I think that's a fair criticism. I mean, I suppose some of my socialist or communist friends would come back and say, well, but capitalism, there are things about capitalism that are innately exploitative, that are innately abusive, and that automatically give rise to inequalities, whereas if communism is laid out and executed correctly and ethically, that wouldn't happen. So maybe that's a fair point, but you could go right back to what I think is your main criticism, which is that it would still be susceptible to corruption. And I think one of the main differences, or one of the main things that I think keeps me from being from being a lot further to the left than I am, is that even though I share the broadly speaking, I share the goals of a lot of leftists, at least generally speaking, maybe not specific goals like getting rid of the state, but I want the world to be a better place. I want to end poverty. I want people to be able to live a happy, comfortable, dignified life. I don't want people to have to worry about being left to die if they can't find a job where they can make money while allowing other people to profit from their labor more than they do. I mean, there's all kinds of issues with our current system that I see that leftists see and talk about, and are talking about, in many cases, talking about with a lot more fire and passion than other people, than more moderate people. And, so I feel a lot of kinship and commonality with them on those issues. But I also think that, a more socialist or communist or leftist anarchist system like some people would want to implement could fall prey to a lot of the same abuses and corruptions that have made our current society so difficult for so many people to live in. Like, it would not be a panacea. It would not be a perfect solution. It might be a major improvement, but then again, it might also lead to something even worse. And I feel like in their zeal to encourage us to overturn the current system and implement something completely new, I think a lot of leftists lose sight of that, or downplay that. And I think it's fair to point that out. I don't think it's fair, and I don't think you're doing this in your question, but I don't think it's fair to treat every proposed communist system as though it would automatically be like the Soviet Union, or say like, well, because the Soviet Union turned out the way it did, or because China is the way it is, therefore all communist systems would inevitably, fall to authoritarianism and the population would be starving. And I don't think that's remotely a fair criticism. And a lot of people do that. A lot of people treat all forms of proposed communism as though it would automatically result in something like the Soviet Union. And I don't think that's fair. But I do think it's fair to point out that, the people who were behind the Russian Revolution didn't exactly foresee it turning out that way either. Like it became an authoritarian movement, even though it was founded on principles that were exactly the opposite. Throughout its history was justified by appealing to those same principles. Even though it was in practice completely the opposite. So, I mean, I think it's fair to point out that a communist system would be susceptible to that kind of corruption, just the same as capitalism and representative democracy and, the various forms of government and economics that we have now are susceptible to corruption and exploitation. Next question is from Darian Sills Evans. My social media feeds have been full of self-proclaimed Trekkers who suddenly have realized that Star Trek is woke. My multi-part question is, what show were they watching? Why do you think some people are so freaked out by people of color or women in recent sci-fi? What show are they watching question is something that I ask myself frequently whenever I'm reminded of the existence of right-wingers among Star Trek fandom, or when I see people complaining about, the diversity of the cast or something like that, or what they perceive as like political messaging that's too progressive or too heavy-handed. And I wonder what show they've been watching that they just noticed that it was progressive and super political and super heavy-handed. Like, Star Trek has never, ever from the very beginning been anything else but politically progressive and has often been very, very heavy-handed in delivering those messages. So yeah, what show are they watching? Why are people threatened by it? Because I think because it would represent a change in the makeup of a lot of our popular culture. It would mean more people of color and women in prominent roles, and therefore, as a proportion of the total number of people in stories or on screen, a smaller portion of white people, and that's something that, as the old saying goes, to the privileged, equality feels like oppression. And also I think there's a lot of I think spurious claims to ownership. People act like something's being taken away from them or something is being co-opted, as though women or people of color are invading their space and taking something away from them, when in fact what they're doing is claiming something that has been theirs all along. There have always been women who have been huge Star Trek fans. There have always been people of color who have been Star Trek fans, and it's just now more of them than before are getting an opportunity to help make Star Trek or help or to appear in Star Trek and to drive the storytelling decisions and to be a visible part of it, not just maybe a token character here and there, but a real included part of the story. And they're not invaders. They have been part of the fandom and part of the process all along. It's just that now they're being afforded more of an opportunity to do what they do. And again, It's the way things should have been all along. But if you were used to how things were before, it can feel like something wrong and different and unnatural. But that's not the problem. You're the problem. Like if you have a problem with Star Trek being too woke or too progressive or too inclusive, that's not Star Trek's problem. That's your problem. Some random geek. Hey, Steve, your favorite anarchist agitprop. I have this whole other question ready, but I saw General Contact Unit Problem Child / 255 AD's question and felt the need to provide additional context. Objectively Subjective and crowd had a bad experience with revolutionists because of me. I was on Miss Snarky's stream on June 13th, 2019, talking politics yet again. Here's the stream, and there's a link to it there. I wanted to advocate for anarchism and try to radicalize liberals. They asked me, how many people do you need to kill for your revolution? And I answered, as many as necessary. 1 million, 2 million, how many? I should have followed up with, depends on how many get in the way of redistributing the wealth and unused property. A comrade was watching the stream and said I did terribly, and I fully agree with them. 2 weeks later, I shitposted a joke meme that says kill all landlords on Twitter with no context. Objectively Subjective and crowd took it too literally mean that I am advocating for mass murder. Miss Snarky is a landlady herself. She took it personally. Despite fellow comrades like Leto Anor, Captain Andy, Mabasai, No Known Future, and Chrisiosity explaining that what anarchists truly believe about private property and landlords, Objectively Subjective and Snarky and crowd always retort with, but it doesn't mean advocating for mass murder. That was a whole week of conversations about the topic. Even after explaining myself further with this thread here, the conversation continued. Since then, Objectively Subjective and gang has a really sour taste in their mouth for communism, anarchism, and any form of revolution. They instantly have a combative stance when they realize someone is communist anarchist. American Johnson of the YouTube channel Non-Compete saying some liberals and all fascists have to go to re-education camps also didn't help matters. Hence the reaction to 255 AD's suggestion that he is the kind of person that says join our revolution or fuck off and starve. They've broken off friendships, including me, over their stance on anarchism and communism because of their interactions with me. They didn't like my agitprop in their live chat and copy and paste statements like you do, Steve. They probably wouldn't enjoy being part of a live chatter stream if they see me and my comrades in there. I'm sure you have options on the necessities of a violent revolution, but since nonviolence protects the state, as Peter Gatorloose proves in his book, which Audible Anarchist has an audio version available on their YouTube channel here, and billionaires are never going to peacefully give up their billions in ownership of private property because we ask nicely, I'm afraid we need to be a little serious about the guillotines when we have only 10 years before climate change is unstoppable. What do you think, Steve? Am I an advocate for mass murder? I think it's going a little far to say that you're an advocate for mass murder. But, you know, as I said earlier in this stream, and as I've said before, like, I'm still not convinced that that the kind of full-on revolution that you are advocating for is necessary. I think that we can accomplish an awful lot, you know, with some very, very significant transformative reforms to the current system. But I don't think it's necessary to throw the whole thing out the window and start over again, even with the looming threat of climate change, which I agree does just add a great deal of urgency that was not there before. I might counter that by saying that if the apparatus of the current system, you know, if the governments currently in place could be turned toward the goal of ameliorating the effects of climate change, that would probably be a lot more helpful than if we just tore everything down, you know, and started over from scratch. I feel like the job of counteracting climate change is such a big job that you would almost need the abilities of large institutions working and pulling in the right direction in order to accomplish something. So I don't necessarily think that a socialist revolution that destroys all of the existing institutions would be necessarily the best way to combat climate change. But as always, I always qualify everything I say on the subject by saying that there are quite a few people who are far more educated on the subject than I, and I am not completely closed off to the idea. I don't see why that is the best option of the available options that we have. If we're just picking our favorite option on paper, which honestly, I think advocating for revolution, that's picking your favorite option on paper. Because that, I think, is the idea that we could that would actually happen is at least as far-fetched, if not more far-fetched, than some of the reforms that slightly less radical people are advocating for, more or less within the current system. So no, I don't think you're an advocate for mass murder. I think maybe I do think maybe sometimes people take you wrong, or people impart motives to you that you don't actually have. I mean, like, I totally get why people might be annoyed by your agitprop in the live chat. I don't have a problem with it because I know you, and because I know that your heart is in the right place, and I know that you're motivated by a genuine concern and love for people, including many people who are your friends. I know that you personally give a lot of time and effort and money toward these causes, and it's something that you really genuinely care about. And as I've said before, we share the same goals. We both want the world to be a better place. We both want to reduce human suffering. We both want people to not have to worry about where they're going to live, or what they're going to eat, or are they going to starve to death, or are they going to die because they don't have a job, or they can't afford medical care. We have a lot in common, and we share the same goals in many different ways. So I don't have a problem with the way you interact with people in the chat. But I do see how it can be annoying and aggravating and maybe even counterproductive to your goals in the eyes of certain people. So, I mean, but do I think that everything that was said about you in that was described in that question was fair? No, of course not. And I don't think you are an advocate for mass slaughter. I think that's a little far. John Burnsy, hello, Mr. Shives. Everything was written for my question, and then someone had to do a not actually Trek actually, and synapses fired in my brain, and I had a question. Have you ever read Men Against the Sea? Obviously, Captain Janeway wasn't the victim of a mutiny, but she did have to get her crew back home. Captain William Bligh did this. He found himself cast adrift with 18 of his company in his own ship's launch, with no more than a compass, a sextant, and his journal in the midst of the greatest of oceans and thousands of miles from any place where he could look for help. Yes, adrift at sea instead of in space, there are differences, but if you read Men Against the Sea, you also see some similarities. Bligh managed to navigate 1,800 miles to a British port, and, yet another surprise, the book is dedicated to the memory of Captain Josiah Mitchell of the clipper ship Hornet, who, in the year 1866, after his vessel had been lost by fire in latitude 2 degrees north, 10 degrees 10 minutes west, safely carried 14 of his men in a small open boat to the Hawaiian Islands, a distance of 4,000 miles, after a passage of 43 days and 8 hours. Wow! They were in a rowboat due south of the Gulf of California and due east of Colombia after a fire. Makes you wonder how many were fit to row and how many were suffering from the effects of the fire. I think if you read either of these exploits, it might help put Catherine's leadership skills into perspective. P.S. In the next 50 years, will the Scorpion and the Frog be replaced by the Hitler and the Chamberlain? That would certainly freshen it up a bit. I haven't read that book, and I was not familiar with that story. I was familiar with Captain Bligh, but I was not familiar with Captain Josiah Mitchell, and that wow is the appropriate response to that. I think that's an amazing story. I wish the writers of Voyager had read those books. I wish that more of that was reflected in the show. I mean, I feel like if you're going to say, well, look at analogous situations from history, look at these, captains who were lost at sea and how they were able to get their crews home, and then apply those traits to the situation that the crew of Voyager was in Voyager, like, I feel like you're projecting things into the show that weren't actually there. If the show had depicted Voyager's journey as anywhere remotely as arduous as the journey described in that question, and what we must assume it was like for those sailors lost at sea like that, I think it would have probably been a more interesting show. But as Ronald Moore said in an interview that he gave after he left the show, most episodes of Voyager, the crew seems to be of the attitude that they all expect to be home in the next couple of hours. And I'm not saying that I think the show had to be like this dark, depressing, harrowing, docudrama about desperate, lost people. But if there had been a little bit more sense of gravity of their situation, a little bit more of a sense that these people were really aware of how fucked they were and how urgent their situation was, I do think it would have been a better show. But I don't think that was in the show very often. So it's all well and good to say, well, what about these real life sea captains who were stuck in similar situations to Captain Janeway? And doesn't that make her leadership seem more impressive? Yeah, I guess if we assume that all that stuff happened in between the episodes we actually saw. I mean, at some point, I feel like you have to judge the show based on the show that they actually made. And based on the show they actually made, I feel like it's a lot of missed opportunity, especially where Janeway is concerned. A lot of missed opportunity. And you describing those real life stories, to me, it only amplifies how much of a missed opportunity that show was. Next question is from Ayame. Hey, Steve, do you prefer novels with blunt themes about racism, discrimination, etc., or do you prefer novels that are more subtle about their messages? I think I've answered a similar question to this recently. I prefer subtlety, but if the message is something that resonates with me strongly enough, I can forgive a lack of subtlety. I mean, I generally speaking, I would rather story and character come first and the message be delivered through those rather than being, hit over the head with it. But if it's a message that I think is important, or that I agree with, or that I think should be spread, and propagated more, then I'm willing to forgive a lack of subtlety. I'm willing to forgive lack of subtlety for that reason a lot more readily than I am for other reasons. Yeah. Next question is from Jin Hai. What do you think of the natural born citizen clause? Hey, speaking of President Captain Picard. Example, 50-year-old Congressman Ted Lieu of the Progressive Caucus was a double major in computer sci, political sci, began a law career in the Air Force JAG, is now a colonel in the reserve, defended the rights of sentient androids in a trial against Commander Maddox of the Daystrom Institute, called out Devin Nunes for his corrupt involvement with Trump's Ukraine activity, and constantly tears apart Trump on Twitter. Okay, one of the above may not be true anyways. He's not eligible for president or vice because he wasn't born in the U.S., but immigrated at the advanced age of 3. So he's obviously a brainwashed foreign sleeper cell awaiting activation. The current president and half the Senate has proven that being born on American soil does not mean you are loyal. Can we amend the natural born clause into a more common sense requirement, or just reinterpret natural to mean that you can't be a clone? Sorry, clones. Frakes Shives 2024. Thank you for that. I am so in favor of getting rid of the natural born citizen requirement for president. I cannot overstate how much I think that is completely antithetical to our stated values as a country. And I would absolutely love if we got rid of that. If we passed a constitutional amendment that said you do not have to be a native born citizen to qualify for president or vice president. I am completely in support of that. I think it's nativist. I think it's xenophobic. I think it's just wrong in every way. It's outdated. It's antiquated. It's a relic from another era. And as you point out, we have plenty of examples of people who were born right here who are anything but loyal to the interests of this country and its people. So no, I think it's total bullshit. And if I had my magic wand, I would get rid of it immediately. There is no reason why people who are not otherwise qualified to serve in federal office, and I think the requirement now for offices that aren't covered by the native born requirement of federal offices, like the Senate and House of Representatives, I think, isn't it something like you have to have been a legal resident of the country for for 14 continuous years or something like it's something like I'd have to look it up to get it exact, but it's you have to have lived in the country for 21 years and have lived in it for 14 years consecutively or something like that. But no native born requirement. I see no reason why that is not sufficient for vice president or president. I would get rid of the native born requirement without even thinking twice about it. I think it's a horrible relic of our past that we need to get rid of. Here's one from John Gingras. Hi, Steve. I have a question about Star Trek Picard and will include mild spoilers if people haven't watched it yet. In the teaser at the end of the first episode, we see a Borg that looks a little like Locutus. Do you suppose that the Romulan ship that got assimilated, the Shay-Nor, might have been carrying another Picard clone similar to Shinzon? Could he have been assimilated with the other crew members? Could Soji be after that somehow? It's something I've been musing over, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. I think that's really clever. I don't know. I have no idea. Maybe. I honestly had never thought of that until I read your question. Possibly, you're right. There is that Picard-looking Borg that we've glimpsed just for fractions of a second in the previews for Picard, and who knows what that's about? If it's just like another dream that Picard's having, or some other kind of fantasy sequence like that, or if it's something like you're describing, where it's like another Shinzon that got assimilated. Maybe. I don't know. I have no idea. I know that they are building up to a big reveal. There's something that we don't know that certain characters in the story know, and it is motivating them, but we don't know what it is yet. And they're building it up as some huge, shocking thing. Whatever it is, I hope it's worth it. And who knows? Maybe something like what you're describing would be part of that. I don't know. But it's a really clever and interesting idea. And again, good for you, because I had not that thought had not even crossed my mind. So maybe, yeah, who knows? Next question is from Ahoy Yerno. I listened to your late seating about Toy Story, and I've got questions. I remember seeing that movie as a kid. It was terrifying. Toy Story is a horror movie between Exorcist Woody, zombie toys, torture and murder, Barbies with pterodactyl heads, and Woody being abandoned by his best friend. The main theme of the movie is that toys are always watching, always judging, and if you don't behave, they'll attack you. I was good to my toys. Most of them are still in pristine shape when I gave them to my own kids, and yet back then I didn't know if I could trust my plush to sleep with me anymore. I feared my own toy, the one I slept with. There are two jokes you made that I have my perspective on. You joked the movie was written by Steve Jobs. Makes sense. The movie is obviously written by someone who hates children. Secondly, you joked the writers had to be prosecuted. I agree, and the jury should be death qualified. That's a joke. Furthermore, a bit of exposition explaining this horror story as a purely fictional world would have been good for the children, me, watching it. You correctly judged the movie as a classic from the perspective of an adult. That's why Toy Story deserved those Oscars. But that's my question. Should a children's movie be reviewed by adult standards, or should it be reviewed by children's standards? And if it's the latter, how does that change your opinion of the film? It doesn't really change my opinion of the film, because I think if I had seen Toy Story as a child, I probably would not have seen the same things in it that you did. I think your perspective on it is totally valid and really interesting, and I totally see where you're coming from. But I think if I had seen Toy Story as a child, I would not have honed in on, the toys are always watching, the toys are always judging. If you're not good to your toys, they'll attack you. I mean, I think that's definitely there, and I don't think you're imagining that that's part of the movie, but I would not have viewed all of that in a negative way. I would have focused more on the wondrous idea of, oh, your toys are alive. When you're out of the room, your toys come to life and talk to each other. I would have focused more on the charming aspects of it and sort of the wish fulfillment aspects of it, and not on the horror aspects of it that you did. So it wouldn't have changed my opinion of the movie all that much if I reviewed it as child, as I would have seen it as a child, or as I assume I would have seen it as a child. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm not accurately estimating what my response would have been. But I think it would have been something like that. So no, it wouldn't have changed my perspective. But I mean, I feel like the larger question of by what standard should you judge a movie? I mean, there is value, I think, in trying to look at it from different points of view. And if you are an adult if you are a grown-up watching and reviewing a kid's movie, I do think it's valid to take into account how children seem to be reacting to it. But I mean, I don't think there's one correct. There's just different viewpoints. I don't think there's one correct way to do it. I mean, I think it's valid to review a children's film from an adult perspective because if that is your perspective as a critic and you're able to articulate that in an interesting way, then I think that's a perspective worth sharing. If you are able to create, to imagine what a child's response would be, or if a child wants to share their response to it, I think that's a perfectly valid response, a perfectly valid way of criticizing. I don't think there's one right way or one fair and unfair way to do it. But yeah, if I were a kid watching Toy Story, I don't think I would have seen it quite the way you did. But again, that just illustrates to me part of the value of critical analysis and of criticism, which is that we get to articulate and share our points of view on art with each other and gain insight into it and talk about it. Next question is from Rick Dance. Do you believe the Federation in Picard is a critique of post 9/11 America, a political body founded on noble ideals, abandoning those ideals as they retreat in fear following an attack? I think this may go back even farther, back to the Dominion War, when Starfleet transitioned from a humanitarian and peacekeeping armada to a full-fledged navy. Yeah, well, obviously you couldn't say that the Dominion War was a critique of post 9/11 America because it was produced before 9/11, so that wouldn't work. But yeah, I think the idea of deconstructing the myth of the Federation and showing that it is, as you say in your question, a political body founded on noble ideals that is completely capable of abandoning those ideals in the right or wrong situation. I think that is obviously was a very big part of Deep Space Nine. And yeah, I do think you can interpret the way the Federation is being depicted in Picard as a critique of post 9/11 America, and I'm completely here for it. I think it's great. I think it's the kind of thing that Star Trek has to do if it wants to remain politically relevant in our modern culture. Like, you have to change with the culture, and you have to, if you want to make a politically relevant show, then that show has to be engaging with issues that are current right now. And yeah, the Federation has always been a metaphor for the United States, at least in part. I'm not saying that's the only possible way to view the Federation, but it has always partially been a metaphor for the United States, a stand-in for the United States. And if you're going to be creating a show where one of the major political entities in the universe of the show is a stand-in for the United States, I think it's completely fair to write that in such a way that it reflects the United States and it has the same problems that the United States has. So yeah, I do think that is a valid way of looking at the Federation in Picard. I haven't heard the writers talk about it, but it would not surprise me at all if it were intentional. And I think it's great. I think it's what Star Trek ought to be doing. I think it's what Star Trek has to do if it wants to continue to be Star Trek, as it continues to produce new content in the years to come. Next question is from Joe McClory. Sadly, I wasn't able to make your Facepalm After show, but in it you addressed a few questions about how the Federation is being made less perfect, like it was a retcon. Honestly, I have always taken it as the Federation backsliding under stress. There are lots of examples of the Federation screwing up and becoming less utopian during DS9 and the Next Gen movie set during that time. The Dominion was portrayed as an existential threat that the Klingons and Romulans never seemed to be. And in the wake of that stress, the Federation was willing to restrict freedoms pretty heavily in DS9, and even was going to commit a genocide in Insurrection. Honestly, anyone who claims that Picard is the show that first showed the Federation is not a true utopia is just wrong and not paying attention. As for an actual question, do you think the show is meaning to show the Federation as backsliding, or that it was never as good as it thought itself to be in the first place? And how important is it to tell the audience that they need to keep an eye out for their government becoming less free, or that it is important not just to assume that because things seem free for you, that your government might be less free to people, less advantaged than you? Yeah, well, I'm gonna let me try to phrase this so it doesn't seem like I'm just repeating myself from the previous question. Yeah, I do think it's probably, or at least it's possibly intentional, and I think it's very, very important. And I agree with you completely that it is not something that is new to Picard. I think And you know what? Honestly, we still don't know what the whole story is with Picard. I get the feeling that the powers behind abandoning the Romulans and cutting off the rescue effort and all of that will probably turn out to be the work of one of yet another conspiracy within the Federation, as opposed to being blamed on large-scale institutional problems within the Federation, because that's usually what happens in Star Trek. It's not that the whole Federation is rotten. It's just there's a few elements within it that have co-opted it and subverted it. And Picard, it seems like it might be heading in that situation, in that direction. Excuse me. But we'll see. But yeah, I think, I mean. There are so many Star Trek fans that are just completely resistant to the idea of presenting the Federation as anything less than a utopia. And I feel like that's just a recipe for irrelevance. That's a recipe for Star Trek to become politically irrelevant, to guarantee that it will not be challenging, it will not be alive, it will not be engaging, it will not be bold. It will just it will be like just pleasing, like, oh, you liberals, don't worry, you've got everything right. If only everybody would adopt your ideals, then the world would be a better place. Like that to me is not the way forward. The way forward is to point out the problems that still exist in our culture right now that we need to be addressing, and say, see, this is a problem for us right now. It's not a problem for them over there. It's not some hypothetical problem that we've gotten past. It's a problem for us right now, and we need to worry about it because the Federation is us. Starfleet is us. And if they have problems, it's because they're reflecting our problems. Like that I feel like that's so important for the show to do, and I'm glad that Picard is doing that. And I was very glad that Deep Space Nine did it, to the extent that it did it. And you're right, it is nothing new in Star Trek, and it's something that Star Trek needs to do. And I got a comment from someone, I think on my most recent Trek actually video, on my comment response video that I put up, where they said, yeah, but if the Federation are flawed. And the Romulans are flawed, and the Klingons are flawed, then who am I supposed to root for? And I thought, like, what, do you not root for flawed protagonists in other forms of fiction? Like, does a protagonist have to be perfect for you to root for them? I mean, the Federation still has a pretty goddamn great society. Like, we can show cracks in the Federation's facade. We can show that in the 24th century, humans are still susceptible to prejudice and ignorance and xenophobia. That doesn't destroy everything else that's good about the Federation. They still have a pretty great society. They still have an economy where people don't have to work in order to live. They seem to have universal health care, universally high standard of living. They have solved a lot of the problems that we have yet to solve. Right? They're still doing really well. It's still something that we should aspire to. But, the fact that they've shown that their institutions could still be corrupted or subverted, and that people in that time are still susceptible to the same biases and prejudices that we are, just perhaps in different forms or choosing different scapegoats or different targets, that doesn't ruin it for me. That's just realistic. It doesn't mean that we should no longer, we might as well just forget about trying to build a better world that looks like the one in Star Trek. If people are still going to have the capacity for prejudice, it's not even worth it. Like, that just seems ridiculous to me. But long story short, yes, I agree with you, and I think it's super important for Star Trek to do that. Next question is from Daniel Zafer Joyce. There has been some talk of having Worf appear on Star Trek Picard. If they did have Dorn back on, should they make any accommodations for the new Klingon look that Discovery used? If the change in makeup is just the result of special effects aesthetic continuing to evolve over time, and with more budget, shouldn't Worf being full Klingon look just like the Discovery Klingons? Realistically, the makeup would need an update, since shooting in HD means you can't fudge certain details anymore, like the fact that the bridge of DS9's Worf's nose isn't attached to his forehead. Same thing with his brother Kurn. I find it so distracting, and those episodes weren't even shot in HD. No, I think if Worf appears on Picard or appears in any other yet to be produced Star Trek productions. I think the makeup should be updated, as you said, so that it looks good in HD. But in terms of redesigning it so it's more in line with the Discovery Klingons, I think it would, because Worf is a pre-established character, and we have a pretty good idea of what Worf looks like. I think it's probably best to just leave his makeup more or less the way it was. Just improve it so it looks good in HD. But to remake Worf and to say, well, that's the way Klingons look in Discovery, so this is the way they have to look now. I mean, I feel like the best, if you have to come up with some kind of headcanon to explain it, you could just say, well, there's a lot of physiological diversity in Klingons, and the Klingons that we see in Discovery look like that, but there are also Klingons that look like Worf, and just, I mean, it really doesn't matter to me. They're all Klingons. So if Worf appears in Picard, or some other, future series, my suggestion and my guess would be that his makeup would be more or less the way we've seen it before, just with cosmetic improvements so that it reads good on an HD video production, but not, it probably won't be, Discovery version of Worf. I wouldn't expect that, and I think that's probably not the best thing to do. It would be too distracting, and it would be better just to give us Worf the way we know Worf looks. Next question from David Colby. I have a beef to pick with a Ferengi. Not only are they a bunch of really obvious anti-Semitic tropes bundled into a single alien race, not only is their culture as deep as a thimble, their one and only religion is based around profit, but they're also the most unforgivable thing of all. They're a really bad critique of capitalism. Capitalism isn't bad because the people involved are just greedy meanies who con individual people. It's bad due to the fact that it rewards the worst actors and only values profit from a systemic level. Also, there's this one episode of DS9 where the Federation characters are completely baffled by the idea of trading items for services or goods. But capitalism isn't just trading items and goods and services. It's about capital owning the means of production and exploiting labor. That's not capitalism, dipshits. That's just barter. Anywho, what's your least favorite race from Star Trek, and why do they suck? How would you change them to make them better? What's my least favorite race from Star Trek? That is a really tough question. I mean, a lot of the aliens they created for Voyager leave a lot to be desired. I'm really not a big fan of the Kazon because they feel so derivative. It really feels like they just said, we'll start with the Klingons and we'll just change things around a little bit. Both in terms of their look, the makeup, and in terms of what we see of their culture. There's a lot of it. It's just so they're kind of like Klingons. So if I wanted to change the Kazon, I would say, well, let's try to make them a little more unique, And they did something similar with the Hirogen. They reminded me a lot of the Jem'Hadar. They reminded me a lot of the Jem'Hadar. There are differences. Obviously, the Jem'Hadar were genetically engineered soldiers, and they were sort of single-mindedly bred to serve their masters, and the Hirogen are a much more independent species, and they focus on hunting, not on military service. But the same idea of they're this really, really badass, physically imposing race that is single-minded and very militant and very focused on action and machismo and the proficiency at killing, and they felt very much like the Jem'Hadar. So I mean, if you want me to say how would I change them, I would try to make them a little different. I would maybe identify areas in which they are too similar to a pre-established alien species and say, well, how can we fix this? How can we move them a little further away from this and make them into their own thing? I mean, focus on the parts of the Kazon, for instance, that were different from Klingons. I joked in a video I did a few years ago. I said they're like the Klingons of the Ozarks, or they're they're Klingons trying to make it on low incomes. They seem to be a lot less prosperous than many other Star Trek aliens seem to be. So maybe focus on that. And instead of focusing on, they're dangerous, they're scary alien bad guys, focus more on, they seem like they're having a pretty rough time. Let's try to get some more stories out of that than out of, they're attacking the ship. I don't know. Next question from John Brockman. ZOMG Cuck, when you gonna learn that Trump is God? You just told me, so I guess I've learned. You're right. Yep. I've come around to Michael Worley's way of thinking. Yes, Trump is. I can't even say it jokingly. I'm sorry, John. I know I've disappointed you. I don't believe there is a God. And if there was one, I would really hope it was nothing like Trump. Although if certain interpretations of the Bible were true, he's a lot like Trump. Nathaniel Robinson. Hi, Steve. Thanks for bringing up my convoluted comment in your recent video. How about something simple? Is Michael Worley capable of empathy, or is religion just an amplifier for his anger and disappointment? I think it's more the second one. I think he is capable of empathy. But like many real people who I think share his worldview or who are similar to him, his empathy is extremely selective. There are certain groups of people that he has identified as being part of the problem or inferior or undeserving in some way that I don't think he feels empathy for. But there are other people that he thinks are like him, that he personally identifies with, that he probably feels a great deal of empathy for. Yeah. So I don't think it's a total lack of empathy or that he's incapable of empathy. I think you're right. His religion is an amplifier for his anger and disappointment and insecurity and and fear and ignorance and paranoia, as it is for a lot of people who he is meant to be a comment on. Yeah, I know. I don't think it's that he's totally incapable of empathy. It's very, very selective. Norman Bookwald. Hi, Steve. While I want to ask certain things of yesterday's episode of Picard, I don't want to spoil for any who hadn't seen any yet, so I'll save it for after the end of the first season. So let's bring up the primaries. Warren is my candidate, and this week I think she demonstrated she would be the best one to defeat Trump. We saw a potential preview with Bloomberg, and I loved it. What is your current assessment of where the candidates are right now? Which ones do you think have the definite demonstrated potential to beat Trump, and which the least? Well, besides Tulsi and, as shown this week, very obviously, Bloomberg. Well, I intend to vote for Elizabeth Warren in my primary. I donated to her campaign yesterday, which is I think it's the first time I've ever donated to a primary campaign. I usually don't really, I stay out of the primary. And then if I think I donated to Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2016. I'm pretty sure I did at some point, but it was after the primaries. It was after she was the nominee. But I donated to Senator Warren's campaign. And she's my candidate. She's who I hope gets the nomination. She's who I intend to vote for. If not her, I would be completely happy with Bernie Sanders. I would vote for him without a second thought. After that, it gets a little tougher. I would vote for any of them, even Bloomberg. I would hold my nose and vote for Bloomberg. If it was Bloomberg or Trump, I would vote for Bloomberg. I would not stay home. I would not vote for a third party. I would vote for the Democrat because I think that's the best chance to unseat Trump, and I feel like that's incredibly important. So I would vote for any of the Democrats if they were the nominee. But the only two that I am like really, really excited about personally, and that I think would be a great president and capable of leading and pushing the kind of change and progress that I would like to see, would be Warren or Sanders. Anyone other than them, I think, would be varying degrees of acceptable, and in Bloomberg's case, like only acceptable because the alternative would be Trump. But nothing that I would be like super excited about, because I feel like their proposals are too timid, and I feel like I do not think that a Democrat should be trying to get the nomination by aiming low and scolding people who want to shoot for something larger and saying, we can't afford that, we can't do that. When President Kennedy said we are going to the moon by the end of this decade. He didn't say, well, it would be nice if, hypothetically speaking, we could get to the moon by the end of the decade, but let's face it, that's just magical thinking and that's never going to happen. So let's try to set some more attainable goals. I mean, he said we're going to go to the moon. And yes, there's a lot of stuff we're going to have to do before we get there, but let's never lose sight of the fact that the goal is the moon, right? So for me, for a presidential candidate, something like Medicare for all, universal health care, that's the goal. That's what we're pointing at. And yeah, okay, do we have, if we get to the point where we say, fuck, we have to do this in steps, we have to phase this in, we have to do this or that, but okay, fine, whatever. But we should not be saying, stop looking at the moon, let's focus on step one in the primary. We should be saying, look, this is where we're going. This is where we need to be looking. And Warren and Sanders are doing that. And the other candidates, you know, specifically Biden and Buttigieg and Klobuchar, they're aiming low. And I have no patience for progressives or Democrats in the primary who are starting out aiming low. I want to start out aiming high. And if we have to lower it a little bit, you know, when we finally get to the time to actually try and do something, that's fine. I'll accept if we have to compromise or we have to do it in stages, whatever. But we're aiming here. We're not going to start out aiming here and saying, okay, let's do this. We're not doing this. This is impossible. Let's just do this. I hate that. That doesn't inspire me at all. And I think it's not going to turn out voters. And I don't think it's going to help us. It's being sold in the guise of pragmatism. And I don't think, I'm not excited by Democrats who aim low. So I'm super into Warren. I'm into Sanders, and I will vote for any of the others if they're the nominee. But I really hope it's either Warren or Sanders, and I'm voting for Warren in my primary. Jan Beek EU. Hi, Steve. Short one today. Why should I watch TOS? Saw a few episodes over the last 20 years, but never found a way in. I grew up with TNG and DS9, born in 82. Well, I mean, if you don't want to watch it, if it's not for you, then you don't have to watch it. Like if you've given it a chance and it doesn't really work for you, then I mean, you don't have to watch it. You're still a Star Trek fan. Like, you don't have to be a completist in order to be a Star Trek fan. You can watch what you like, and you don't have to watch what you don't like. I'll tell you what, I like it because I like I like sort of watching the early days of the franchise. I like watching, it's the last Star Trek show where you can tell that they were making it up as they went along. Well, I guess the animated series would be that, but you know, before it was a franchise, before it was this big thing, it was just a show that they were writing week to week, and they're just making all this stuff up as they go along. And I love that. I think there's something very charming and very exciting about that. I find all the characters very appealing. Like, I like Captain Kirk. I like Spock. I like Dr. McCoy. I like Uhura and Sulu and Chekhov and Scotty. I enjoy spending time with them. I enjoy watching those characters. I think some of the episodes are fantastic. I think Amok Time is just a great episode of television. I think City on the Edge of Forever is just a great episode of television. I think Balance of Terror is just a great show. I really enjoy TOS. For all those reasons, and also it's kind of campy and kind of corny, and it has a certain charm, and it has, you know, because it does wear its politics on its sleeve, it does have kind of a Twilight Zone-ish appeal where it's like super heavy-handed and very problematic in a lot of ways, but also it totally has its heart in the right place, and it's really trying to do something good and send a positive message, and I respect that and really appreciate that. So there's all kinds of things about it that I absolutely love and adore, and I love classic Star Trek. But if you don't like it, if it doesn't appeal to you, that's fine. Like I wouldn't dream of trying to twist your arm or trying to talk you into watching it. If you've given it a shot and you don't really like it, that's fine. You don't have to. Next question is from Matthew Maida. Hey, Steve, have you noticed the veiled anti-socialist blitz being done on MSN, as with Bernie is at the top of the heap so far? Like on Hardball, Chris Matthews is not even denying pushing back on Bernie Sanders because of his democratic socialism. Is the DNC and MSN so concerned about the socialism of one man, given apparently no one takes civics anymore, to know that a whole government doesn't change for one man, even a president, if he doesn't have support of the other branches of the government, that they make him seemingly more of a threat than Donald Trump currently as president? Is the fear of socialism in reality just a Cold War throwback of older establishment pundits and politicians of the 20th century in a 2020 world? Well, yeah, I think, a lot of it is just, it's that people who represent the establishment or represent the status quo either fear Sanders or just dismiss him and just think that his proposals would never happen anyway, so what's the point? And supporting him would be dangerous for the party because it would be a path to to defeat because they don't think people would support it. And again, I feel like a lot of that is what I was talking about in a previous question. A lot of it is just there's an instinct among a lot of Democrats, unfortunately, to aim low, to start out by telling people about all the things they can't have. Even if it's stuff that the rest of the world has had for years. I'm still baffled that anybody gets beyond first base with, saying, well, we can't do universal health care when every other developed country has done it already. And there are still people who come out and say, yeah, but we can't do it. And for this, and this. I don't understand why that position is remotely taken seriously. But there are a lot of people who have that position who say, well, yeah, it would be nice, but we just can't do it because of X, Y, and Z. Because I think, there's a certain timidity, there's a certain resistance to change. I mean, look, before you even get to the point of advocating for a revolution, like my leftist friends, before you even get close to that, there are still changes that someone like me would advocate for and fiercely fight for and say we need to do that are so big that if you are attached to the status quo, if you are used to things being a certain way, so much so that it has shortened your vision and you just don't think that anything better or anything that much better is possible, yeah, that kind of change can be scary and can seem impossible. It can seem like, well, why are we even wasting our time thinking about this? It's not going to happen. There is a lot of a lack of imagination and a lack of courage, a lack of willingness to say, fuck it, well, let's at least try. And that is a big problem in the Democratic Party. And with the Democrats, a lot of times it's a lack of courage. It's not that they have bad intentions. It's not that their goals are antithetical to a better society. It's just that they don't have the courage to really aim at what they should be aiming at. And I think someone like Sanders and Warren, who doesn't inspire quite the same level of animosity as Sanders, because she always makes sure to say, I'm a capitalist. Don't be too scared of me. I'm a capitalist. But because they are obviously, blatantly, unashamedly pushing for big changes, that can rub some people the wrong way because some people are just too fearful or don't have the imagination or the ability to really embrace the possibility of that kind of change. And I think that is behind a lot of the resistance to a candidate like Bernie Sanders. And you're right, it's ridiculous. Even if Sanders were every bit the wild-eyed radical leftist that people say he is, it would be one guy having to work with a Congress full of, at best, centrist, moderately leftist Democrats. Like it would not be some kind of transformative, like, oh shit, now capitalism is going to vanish overnight because Bernie Sanders is it's a completely overblown fear, even if Bernie was the person that a lot of people are characterizing him to be. Finally, question from Sean Hartley. I hope I haven't missed this yet. Last minute on a Friday. When referring to synths in Picard, do you think this includes the Doctor from Voyager? He is a synthetic life form, and they didn't specify whether it was just androids or all synthetic life. Well, it doesn't appear to include emergency holograms because the La Sirena, the ship that is captained by Captain Rios, that Picard and company have been aboard for the last couple of episodes, its entire crew seems to be holograms. There's the emergency engineering hologram, the emergical medical hologram. There's an emotional psychiatric hologram. Like there's a lot of EMH type programs on that, and they seem pretty intelligent. They could just be programmed to interface that way, but they seem pretty intelligent. They seem like they would at least have the potential, if they were left on, like the Doctor on Voyager was, they would at least have the potential to become fully sentient as he did. So it doesn't appear to include holograms. Maybe that's because they view holograms as being easier to control. Like it's easier to turn off a hologram than it is to control an android if an android goes rogue. I don't know, but it doesn't appear that the ban on synthetics includes EMHs or holograms like we saw the Doctor in Voyager. But we'll see. Who knows? All right, that was the last patron question. So now let's go to the live chat. Hi, everybody. Thank you for bearing with me. I know that took a while, but thank you to all of my patrons for asking all those great questions. I want to acknowledge a couple of super chats before I turn to the live chat, because some people were nice enough to leave me super chats when I wasn't paying attention to the chat. So I got a super chat from John Burns. Thank you, John. He says, oops, due west of Columbia. Yeah, that makes more sense, doesn't it? And from Red Spiral Ray, who says, wouldn't it be great to see Trump's youngest Barron grow up to be a liberal Democrat who married a woman of color, really stick it to his dad? Yeah, I'm a little iffy on, on saying, oh, wouldn't it be great if he grew up and married a woman of color? That would really stick it to his dad. Like, there's something a little icky about that. But yeah, I'm sure Daddy would not really appreciate that. And another one from David Appleman. Thank you, David. That says, yes, more Picard. Okay. Well, I'll talk about Picard as long as everybody wants me to talk about Picard. So yeah, turning to the live chat now for some more questions. And again, as always, I apologize if I miss your question. It's nothing personal. I probably just didn't see it. So here's one from 255 AD, and I'm kind of just starting at close to the bottom. So if you ask one further up, I'm sorry. I'm just going to do it that way. 255 AD says, question: Michael Worley is still having trouble getting sponsors. Can't he get someone like the Kochs or those oil billionaires who back Rubin to sponsor him? I don't want to spoil too much, and also I don't know exactly where it's going quite yet, but he will be getting a sponsor at some point soon. I don't think it'll be quite like the Kochs, but he will be getting a sponsor at some point soon. Seal0626, do you not think the mystery Borg looks a lot like Daniel Stewart, son of Locutus, say I? They still had his DNA on file and grew a new one. Maybe, and I've heard other people say that it looks like he might have been played by Daniel Stewart. Like, yeah, who knows? I'll wait and see like everybody else. But yeah, possibly. Maybe they cloned him a new Locutus. Twilord, with the UK destined to become the junior in any future relationship with Ireland, is it imperialistic of me to feel they should abolish their monarchy? It is clearly a treasured cultural institute. I mean, I think I would be in favor of any country that still has a monarchy abolishing the monarchy. I mean, I don't know if it's necessary imperialistic to say that they should, abolish their monarchy. I just think it's, I would just rather monarchies be done away with, even ceremonial ones, like mostly is the case with the UK. Oh, Carlisle the Cinephile. So I got to ask, did you just buy a bunch of Star Trek action figures for your spoof comics? Yes, that is exactly what happened. Francois Lacombe, what happened to the Voyager Doctor in the Picard series, I wonder? I'm really interested to know that too, actually, because it seems like seeing how they wrote 7 of 9 in this last episode and seeing the totally unanticipated and absolutely fascinating life that they have crafted for her 20 years on from Voyager. I would love to see what they came up with for the Doctor. I think they did such a good job of showing us 7 of 9 at this point in her life and having her be completely interesting and consistent with the person that we saw in Voyager, but also just so fresh and new and exciting and unexpected. They could have easily just said, oh, she joined Starfleet. Now she's first officer on some ship. That would have been so boring. The way they came up with the development they came up with for 7 in Picard, I thought was just terrific. So I would love to see what they would come up with. Like, what is the Doctor doing now? I would love to know. Super chat from Matthew McEwen. Thank you, Matthew, very much for your generosity. And it says, I love the show. I'm wondering what you think about Senate races in the 2020 election, since winning the Senate is almost as important as winning the White House, if not more important. Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's what I think about it. I think winning the Senate is incredibly important. And I'm not going to spoil anything about what happened in the episode, but 7 has a really interesting character arc that you couldn't have seen coming. I'll just say that. I think winning the Senate is super, super important. And if Mike Bloomberg wants to help, he should drop out of the presidential race and he should support Democratic Senate candidates. I think that's way more important than Mike Bloomberg doing a vanity run for president, especially after the way he did in that debate. Like, it's not going to be you, dude. I'm sorry. It's not going to be you. David Colby mentions the Fenris Rangers. It's much more interesting than you might have thought just projecting. It's a more interesting projection from the last time we saw these characters, I thought. Secular Scholar, heard you made the song for Hugo and Jake. If that's true, will you redo it now that Hugo came out as Hannah? Well, no. I'm not. I'm not going to have anything to do with Hannah and Jake. Period. I think it's wonderful that Hannah came out. I think anybody who should feel entitled to come out and be who they truly are. I think that's great. But I still don't have any interest in having anything to do with them ever again. So. If she had been Hannah at the time, I would have said Hannah, or if she had been out as Hannah at the time, I would have said Hannah and Jake, and I would still feel the same way as I do now about them. Sean Hartley of Star Trek crossed over with DC again. Do you think the Borg would be able to assimilate Superman? Yeah. I'd be interesting to see them try. Wouldn't they? I mean, didn't they do that already? They already did cyborg Superman. Some random geek, do you think that folks disillusioned by the Federation and Picard is because it reminds them of the real world America and the UK in our darkest timeline? That's probably some of it. I know a lot of people view the Federation as aspirational. And again, as I said earlier in an answer to a previous question, I mean, it still is aspirational. They still do have a much better society than we have at the current time. But I think a lot of people view it as, they have this, they view it as a total fantasy. It's like, oh, someday we'll completely overcome all of our bigotry and all of our prejudice and all of our tendency to ignorance and xenophobia. And when that turns out to not be the case, they're like, oh, and, I just think that's, I just don't feel that way about it. But I think that's probably a lot of it, sure, for some people. Another super chat from John Burns. Thank you as always for your generosity, my friend. The UK is a constitutional monarchy. If you're unsure about this, read about what body of UK government led to the death of Charles I. Then Cromwell died. The people voted to bring back the monarchy, did not end Parliament. Yeah, it's a constitutional monarchy is probably the best kind of monarchy you can have. But if you've gone so far as to have a constitutional monarchy where the actual power of government rests in Parliament, why not just get rid of the monarchy altogether? Why have a constitutional monarchy is the best kind of monarchy. But if you've gone that far, just get rid of the monarchy. But I'm not going to tell the British people their business. Here's another super chat from David Appleman. Thank you again for your generosity. What modern day issues do you think the show Picard is addressing? Well, I think it seems to be addressing xenophobia. It seems to be addressing reluctance to accept refugees, suspicion of refugees. Those seem to be the big ones so far. I mean, there are probably other ones that I haven't picked up on or that haven't been brought to fore quite yet. To be, the Federation was a derelict in its duty toward the Romulan people. They failed to take in the refugees that they should have taken, and that is a great breach of their principles and their ethics. And I think that the big message there is that that's exactly what the United States and the other great Western democracies are doing right now. So I think that's one of the big issues that Picard is commenting on. Daryl Letts, do you take part in any recycling programs? I recycle mainly paper, and my record is 462 pounds of paper back in 2012. I'm hoping to break my record this year. Happy Black History Month. Yes, happy Black History Month. Let's not forget that it's Black History Month. The thing is, I recycle whenever I can, but not on any large scale thing, because there isn't really a residential recycling program where I live. There are recycling centers that you can take your garbage to, and our landfill in this county actually does a lot of recycling. Like if you take garbage to the landfill, a lot of it gets recycled automatically. Like it's just a part of their program. It's just the way they dispose of it. So I do in that sense, but we don't really have we don't have a residential here in Sharpsburg. We don't have a residential recycling program where you can, separate your trash and put it out on the curb and they take it away. Unfortunately, if they did, I would totally do that. So sadly, no, I don't really recycle in the way that you're describing. Super chat from Twilord. Thank you very much. Cromwell committed a genocide in Ireland, but if you're worried, trust me, we won't view it as endorsing his legacy if you embrace Republican ideals. Good to know. 255 AD says thoughts on super delegates. I think they're anti-democratic. I'm not a big fan of super delegates either because I mean they are sort of they're intended to be anti-democratic in a sense. They're intended to allow the party to sort of reassert some level of control. Yeah, I'm not like I don't have a major problem with them. Like I don't think they must be done away with no matter what. But yeah, they are anti-democratic, and I'm not like a big fan of them. Super chat from Red Spiral Ray. Thank you very much for your generosity. Would you want to see Mirror Borg show up on one of the shows eventually? Seems like a lot of untapped potential. Oh, that would be really interesting. Are the Borg in the Mirror Universe like a great source of benevolence? That's a really interesting idea. Another super chat from John Burns. The U.S. doesn't like some aspects of the republic they're in. Why don't they just get rid of their republic? That's what their government is, right? Touche. Touche. I don't think we should get rid of our republic, but I mean, obviously, I think we should make some changes in it. But yeah, I know. Yeah, maybe if the British people like having a monarch and they like a constitutional monarchy, then it's not for me to say what they should do. Stephen Deswan, favorite ally and villain species in Trek. I mean, I could say the answer to both is Klingons because they've been both allies and villains throughout the various series. Favorite traditional ally, probably Vulcans, and favorite villain, if not the Klingons, then the Cardassians probably. Moonbeam 87, why are you an atheist? Because I sincerely believe that there probably almost certainly isn't a God. And that's really all there is to it. If you believe that it is that either you feel like you're sure or at the very least you feel like it is by far the more likely possibility that there is no God, then to me you're an atheist, and that's what I am. Josh, the NES Nerd 11. If we ever see the Enterprise in Picard, what would you think if grown-up Wes Crusher was XO? I mean, that would be fine, but it's a little uncreative. Like I would be more of a fan of seeing because it's not like a dynasty. It's not like a generational ship. I mean, having Wesley be the first officer, like that would be cool. That would be nice. Okay, but I would be probably a lot more interested to meet the new people who are in charge of it. I think that would be a better way to go than saying, let's put this familiar character in charge of it. That it's not a dynasty, it's a ship that is assigned a crew by Starfleet. And, um, Seal0626 says, did you find that chirpy little where's your spoiler buddy as chilling as the overt horror in that scene as I did? Horrifyingly sure you're a person, that's not stopping me. Yeah. Yeah, I did. Yeah. Yeah, that whole scene was horrifying. Absolutely. Um, Here's another super chat just came in from Jordanime88. I've always felt the true heart of Star Trek was the spirit of an optimistic future with an emphasis on ongoing improvement. I haven't seen that reflected very much in Picard so far, unfortunately. Well, that's because I think part of the message of the show so far is that even in that optimistic future, you can still lose sight of what made it a better future in the first place. As I think you could certainly say is the case in the United States and other democratic societies around the world that are being inundated with rising fascist movements and resistance to refugees and immigrants, suspicion of, and demonization of minority groups. I mean, so I think it's one thing. It's great that Star Trek shows us an optimistic future. But if you're going to say they need to have an emphasis on ongoing improvement, well, then you have to acknowledge the flaws that still exist in that society. And I think it's great that the Picard show seems to be doing that. Seal0626, do you find it disturbing that Picard seems to be making a motif of prominently killing black men? I really hope they're going somewhere with that. Yeah, that's. I mean, where could they be going with it? Maybe they are going somewhere with it, but it's unfortunate. I've noticed that too, and I'm not sure what to say about that other than, I've noticed it too. Another super chat from Twilord. Thank you again. You think a generational ship of alpha and beta quadrant species on a generational ship headed to Pegasus could work? Yeah, as you mean, like as a premise to a show? Sure, potentially. I might watch that show. Mark the Edge, totally out of left field. Are you a fan of Battlestar Galactica at all? The 2000s series. Why or why not? I watched the first season of it and thought it was great, and then never watched the rest of it. So what I saw of it, I thought was terrific, but I never got around to watching the rest of it. Secular Scholar, do you think Picard is borrowing from undiscovered country, swapping Klingons for Romulans? Yeah, in certain ways. Yeah, they are in similar situations, aren't they? The enemy that needs help. I don't know if that's intentional or not, but yeah, there are certainly similarities. David Colby, Picard's biggest flaw, phasers firing pulses rather than beams, yes or no? No, I mean, I'm not that bothered by that. I know they always used to be beams instead of pulses, but I'm not really that bothered by that. Francois Lacombe, why couldn't the Romulans evacuate their own planet? Their ships are just as good as the Federation's. Well, I think it was probably an issue of just manpower. Or, personnel, I guess I should say. It was a matter of they needed more ships than they had. I mean, clearly some people got out. Clearly there are still Romulans. I mean, there was some degree of an evacuation. I just think it was such a massive undertaking, and they didn't know how much time they had, and they just weren't able to get all the way. The Romulans just couldn't do it themselves. I think that's what we're meant to think is the situation. Moonbeam says, I don't understand how someone can believe in nothing. Please explain. Well, I don't believe in nothing. I mean, I believe in the universe. I believe in I believe in reality as I think it exists. I don't believe in nothing. I just don't believe in God because I see no evidence for God. I mean, I don't know what else. I don't know how much more complicated or how much more simple I can make it. I don't think of my atheism as a belief in nothing. I think of it as a belief in the non-existence of God, or if you like, a lack of belief in the existence of God. And yes, some random geek, I'll be happy to promote Social Justice Alchemy, which is every Saturday at 2 p.m. Eastern on the Social Justice Alchemy channel that is linked in the live chat. You have to scroll up a little bit now because I'm so goddamn far behind. But it is Some Random Geek and John Brockman and Tom McDonald and Jamie J and Phoenix and Jem and Leto Anor, Social Justice Alchemy. Check it out on the Social Justice Alchemy channel. And I think I'm going to be on it at some point in the relatively near future. They have invited me on to be a guest, so I will be on the show at some point. I'll let you know ahead of time if I'm going to be on. Not this weekend, but at some point and in the nearish future. And yes, the patron hangout is this Sunday. My patron hangout is this Sunday at noon. And I'll post about that on the Patreon feed. I'm going to wind this down here in the next couple of minutes. Let me just scroll through and find a couple more questions. Scarlet Lucidophile says, excuse me, I'm not an atheist. I'm an agnostic because I have commitment issues. I like that. Dr. Babylon, I haven't forgotten about If Footmen Tire You. Neither have I. I was actually thinking about it today. I was thinking about it today and thinking I really need to finish that. So I haven't forgotten about it either. John Gingers, how awesome would it be to have a spin-off show starring Seven of Nine in her current situation? That would be a cool spin-off, I have to say. I would generally like to see them avoid doing spin-offs around pre-established characters, but a Seven of Nine show based on her current situation, that would be pretty cool. Yeah, that would be pretty cool. Gauss STO, have you ever tried Star Trek Online? There's a whole new DS9 story arc with the original TV cast doing voiceovers that really good. No, I've never played Star Trek Online. But it sounds awesome. Everybody who talks about it makes it sound really cool. I just haven't watched it yet. Dr. Babylon says, do you ever wish heaven was real? Yes, in some sense. I wish that there was an afterlife. Yeah, and I often wish for that, sure. I mean, it would be my own personal conception of heaven. I've never been totally enamored by any like popular religion's idea of it, but have I wished that it was true in my own way? Yeah, absolutely. Of course I have. Oh, here's another super chat from Twilord. If Odo joined the Great Link earlier, do you think they'd have gone, oh, sweet, let's befriend the Federation. Got to protect those sexy Bajorans? Yeah, maybe. You know, they're really... Odo should have just linked with them right at the beginning and said, hey, a big misunderstanding, everybody. And the Bajorans are pretty cool. Possibly, yeah. John Burns says, I think Picard reminds me of Bruce Campbell's performance in Bubba Hotep. What do you think? I'd never thought of that. But I guess maybe a little? I don't know. I'll have to go back and watch Bubba Hotep again. I don't know. David Colby says, okay, so the fucking paw wraiths are given multiple eps about them, and yet they still feel like they come completely out of left field in the finale of DS9. Yeah, I wasn't too enamored with the paw wraith stuff either. I agree. It wasn't my favorite part of the last few episodes of DS9. Carlisle Cinephile says, in honor of the final season of Clone Wars being released on Disney Plus, have you ever watched it or any of the other Star Wars shows? Do you plan to? No and no. I did watch The Mandalorian and thought The Mandalorian was awesome, but no, I've never watched any of the animated stuff, and I probably won't. I just don't feel that drawn to it, so no. Matthew McEwen, how do you feel about the Hitchens-Dawkins anti-theist atheism? It seems like since Hitchens passed away, there hasn't been a real public personality to take up that mantle. And that doesn't really bother me. I kind of grew out of the type of atheism that was reflexively hostile to all forms of religion quite a while ago. I have no problem with people being religious in general. If you are a religious person and your religion motivates you to do good in the world and to help people and to fight injustice and inequality, then I have no quarrel with you. I have no interest in trying to talk you out of your religious beliefs. That seems like a waste of time to me. If you're religious and you use your religion as an excuse to be abusive or harmful to people or to support injustice and oppression, then I have a big problem with that. But there are people who aren't religious who do the same thing. That's what I have the problem with, not necessarily the religion. Secular Scholar says, do you think Psi 10 became so religious because of how close his name sounds to Satan? Yeah, that's got to be it. That's got to be it. Sean Hartley, why didn't Voyager head to the Beta Quadrant and then take the wormhole to DS9? I guess they just never thought of it. I guess the people who wrote the show, maybe they wanted to avoid having too many close ties or references to DS9. They wanted the show to be its own thing. Or, I don't know, maybe at the position they were in the Delta Quadrant, it was a shorter route to the Alpha Quadrant. I don't know. There's all kinds of reasons why that could be the case. Both in-universe and out-universe. Could be just the crew just didn't fucking think of it because they were dipshits. Did I skip your question, 255 AD? I'm sorry, I didn't realize I skipped your question. Red Spiral Ray, what position on the ship would you want? I think I would be a great first officer. Don't you think? There he is. There, see? Do you see the resemblance? Hey, I think I would be a great first officer. I got the beard, right? There. He lives up there when he's not starring in comics. John Burns, how do you feel about Bruce Boxleitner being signed on to play a character in season 3 of the Orville. Do you think he'll not play another boring admiral? Yeah, that would be nice if they would if they would find something else for him to do. Super chat from Twilord. Hallowed are paw wraiths. Their fire will enlighten. Okay. See, I don't have a problem with people's religion. I think that's completely fine. Oh, hey, Jason's here. Hi, Opinionville. I just saw at the store that the company that made He-Man action figures is making Masters of WW figures. That's right, He-Man style. Wrestling figures. Oh, yeah. Hi, Jason. Okay, I'm all for He-Man style wrestling figures. That would be cool. You mean Mattel? The company that made He-Man figures? You mean Mattel? Like the biggest toy maker in the world? The company that made He-Man figures? Mattel, Jason. Yeah, that would be cool. Okay, 25580. The question about Ashley. Yeah, she's no. I think she was a little. She might have come across more soft-spoken in the video because that's just the way she was on camera. Sometimes people who aren't on camera a lot are different on camera than they are in real life. But no, she's not. She's not always that soft-spoken in real life. She's no, she's a force. She's not always that soft-spoken. I don't think it wasn't necessarily because she was afraid of what shitlords would say. I think that's just the way sometimes people are just different on camera. Carlisle the Cinephile, how much money do I have to pay you to see you dress up as Commander Riker? If I had the costume, I'd do it for you right now for free, buddy. I'm sure it's going to happen at some point. I just haven't bought the costume yet. Gauss STO. This is an interesting question. What is the lefty version of Star Trek? A show that people watch despite it being hostile to their worldview. I don't know. I would think I never watched it, so I don't know. But the impression I always got was that 24 was kind of like that. 24 didn't really seem like all that progressive of a show from the outside, but I can't say for sure because I never watched it. But the impression I always got was that it wasn't like the most progressive show. And I'm sure a lot of, and also like a lot of cop shows. Like I know I love cop shows, and there's all kinds of things about cop shows that I have a problem with in terms of like, glorifying the police or sort of ignoring or papering over problems with policing. But I love NYPD Blue and Homicide: Life on the Street and Law and Order. So maybe a cop show would be something like that too. Random Geek, have you and Jonathan Frakes ever been in the same room before? No. Steve Dizwan, what was your reaction like when you first saw Jerry Ryan tweeted to you? I was in the living room and I was watching something on TV. And what was I forget what I was watching, but I was watching something and I saw that I was on my phone and I saw that she had responded to me. I ran into the kitchen and told my wife about it. I was quite happy and quite excited. Because my wife was in the kitchen where women belong. No, she was working. She has a work area in there. She was at the table working, and I ran in and told her about it. I was happy. I was very happy. Yeah, David Colby, the lefty version of Star Trek would be any cop show ever made. That's that. Yeah, it would probably be something like that. Yeah. John Burns, cosplaying Will or Thomas Riker? Oh, I would be Will. I wouldn't be Thomas. I'm pretty much, actually, according to my action figures and my comics, I'm pretty much Thomas now because Thomas has. I gave Thomas Riker's figure a very Steve-like costume. What about Dear Alta Trekkie? What about a Star Trek NCIS crossover? Yeah, I mean Bakula, Scotty Bax is right there. Liam Foley, what is your favorite USS Enterprise design? Mine is the Enterprise in Discovery. Mine is the Enterprise in the movies, the classic Enterprise in the movies, like Star Trek the Motion Picture with the flat nacelles. But Enterprise in Discovery is a very close second. And I think Enterprise in Discovery is my favorite bridge. But as far as like overall ship design, I think it's the original Enterprise and the Enterprise A because it's the same design in the movies. Oh, 25580. I know you dislike H and J, but are you particularly bothered by the thought that song is misgendering people and you made it? No, because I didn't know at the time. I mean, if I had known if I had willfully misgendered someone, then yeah, I would be bothered by it. I mean, I guess I'm bothered by it a little, but it's not something. Honestly, I don't think about H and J unless people bring them up to me anyway. So it's not something that bothers me in general, because I don't think about them, period. And it doesn't bother me all that much because at the time I didn't know that I was misgendering her. I would never want to do that now, obviously. Twilord, praise be to Janeway, Holy Mother of Voyager. David Colby, my friend is writing a Quantum Leap sequel series pitch. I just have to tell you, so now you can writhe in anticipation too. It's really good. Awesome, that's great. Seal0626, given how much her name has been used already, do you think Picard will acknowledge female Indiana Jones in space? Vosh? Maybe. I mean, I'm honestly not expecting it. I'm not waiting for it, but yeah, maybe. Yeah, I know I've gone 50 minutes over time. I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you all. I'm actually going to wrap it up. So, anybody? And thank you, Robert Mills, for saying that you love my take on Will in the comics. I appreciate making those comics is so much goddamn fun. You have no idea. So I appreciate that people like those. Okay, one more question from Der Alte Trekkie. What did you think about Jean-Luc hamming it up in the heist part of today's Picard episode? I thought it was great. I love to see Picard. I love to see Patrick Stewart ham it up. We talk about what a great actor Patrick Stewart is, and we forget that he can be just as much of a ham as Shatner ever was. I love to see Patrick Stewart hamming it up and having fun, and I think that's what that was with that ridiculous French accent. And he's French. He's supposed to be French, and he has like the most cartoonish, like Pepe Le Pew French accent ever. I loved it. I thought it was great. All right, I'm now going to reluctantly turn from the live chat and wrap this up. So thank you all so much for being with me. I want to remind everybody about the charity links below. A lot of our friends are in some financial trouble and could use a helping hand. So if you possibly can help them out, go to the description of this video, check out the charity links and donate to our friends if you possibly can. And if you can't afford to donate any money, consider sharing the links on your social media and spreading the word, because I know they would really appreciate it, and so would I. Also want to remind you, if you enjoy these videos that I make, well, let's do this one first. If you enjoy these videos I make, you can support the channel through Patreon by going to patreon.com/Steve Shives. For any amount of patronage, $1 a month on up to however much you can afford, any amount at all, you get to submit questions for Ask Away ahead of time that I will answer in the first part of the show. So if you have a question for me and you want to make sure that I answer it, patrons get to submit questions ahead of time. So that's one of the benefits of being a patron. I could not do this without my wonderful Patreon patrons. So thanks all of you so much. However much you are pledging, however long you have been doing it, you make my life possible. And I truly appreciate all of you. Now let's do the podcast link. In addition to the YouTube stuff, I'm also the co-host of a couple of podcasts with the great, hilarious, awesome Jason Harding, who was in the live chat earlier. I don't know if he's still watching or not. Hi, Jason. I'm sorry. I'm sure I yelled at you about the Mattel thing. I didn't really mean it. I'm over it. I was really angry at the time, but I'm over it now. I hope we can forgive and forget. Yeah, but I co-host a couple of podcasts that are part of the Let Me Listen podcast family with the awesome Jason Harding. They are Late Seating, the movie review podcast, where we review classic films and decide whether or not they deserve whatever reputation they have. Our most recent review was of the movie Bound, and you can listen to that right now. And also today, the season finale of our Star Trek-themed comedy podcast, The Ensign's Log, was posted. It's the end of our second season. Can you believe that? So The Ensign's Log is like one of my favorite things that I've ever done. And if you like the Star Trek stuff that I do here on YouTube, I think you'll really like what Jason and I do on the Ensign's Log. So give that a listen. If you have not already, you can listen at letmelistenpodcast.com or on SoundCloud or subscribe via RSS. All the links to all of that are down in the description. So there's that. Don't forget that this weekend, this Sunday at noon Eastern, there will be my patron hangout. So I'll be back on for that. I'll hang out with some random geek will probably be there, and some of the other regulars, and maybe even hopefully some new people too. It's just me hanging out with some of my patrons on the air for an hour, and It's always a lot of fun, so hopefully you'll join us for that. And that's it, everybody. Thank you all so very much for watching. Thank you for all the questions and all the super chats and everything else. And take care. Have a great weekend, and I will see you soon, everybody. Bye-bye.